A Build Hatch developed production.
Hello, I'm Aaron Kyle and welcome to another episode of Build Hatch. This week's episode was a great one. Aussies always love to back the underdog, and I love how Luke's story is exactly that. Luke Mahaffey is a guy who's very modest, well-grounded. However, behind the scenes, Luke as an architect is designing tall buildings for some of Australia's most exciting property developers, such as Third Eye Property Group. This is a guy to watch. As you'll hear, Luke is very down to earth and is quite content staying behind the scenes, and I love that. He lets his work do the talking. This was a very down to earth conversation with Luke, so let's get into it. Luke Mahaffey from LJMA, welcome to Build Hatch.
Thanks for having me.
We're doing something different today. We're recording this inside the West End display suite, which is basically a part of the West End redevelopment. Now, this is a special little setup. We're in a display suite that's right opposite the new Newcastle interchange where the trams connect to the train, and we've got a little cafe inside. So people are able to come in, grab a coffee. In the background, there's an actual real display suite. So we've got a lounge room, a dining room and a kitchen, as well as a bathroom. So this is a really clever way of marketing, and it's pretty simple really. I mean, people come in, they buy a coffee, they can see this really nicely done apartment in the background. Now, you're involved in this project, which is the West End display suite, which is developed by Third Eye Property Group. So before we talk about this amazing project, we always go back in time. So Luke, whereabouts did you grow up?
I've grown up in Newcastle all my life, born and bred. I have a real affinity now with Newcastle. I'm quite a proud Novocastrian. We grew up around the lake, Elibarna way. I've basically attended all my schooling through university in Newcastle, and I'm sort of proud of, I guess, where the city's going at the moment.
It's a pretty cool happening place, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly the last 4 or 5 years, as opposed to when I was a young kid. Just the level of development and the amount of opportunities, I guess, in Newcastle has grown exponentially the last couple of years, and what we've seen with the city itself, as opposed to when I was much younger, it was almost I don't want to say a derelict ghost town, but it was driving up Hunter Street. There was quite a lot of closed businesses, and to see the activation that's happened in the last couple of years is quite impressive.
Yeah, look, I've been coming to Newcastle for years and years and years, and I grew up between here and Melbourne, so I've also seen this city go from this, like you said, a little bit slightly derelict, and even when you travel outside of Newcastle, people always, even still, the people that haven't been here recently, they still relate it to this dirty old steel or coal town.
That's correct. Yeah.
And everyone says it. Whenever they come here, it's always such a wonderful surprise to actually see what a cool place it is. So with your background, to grow up and see the change and then leave school and study here and then now work here yourself, it must be a wonderful thing to have.
Yeah, certainly. And it's probably only been the last couple of years too where I've actually realised how proud I am of the city too myself. You sort of get talking to guys like you, and they get you started on Newcastle, and you just sort of can't stop, and you sort of, it's certainly impressive.
So going through high school, did you set out to become an architect from the early days, or how did you know what you wanted to do?
Interesting story. I never really set out to be an architect. I didn't really have any idea, all through high school, what I wanted to do. All I knew was I wanted to go to university, and what that was, I probably didn't really know up until, I think, when you put your the uni application forms in. I was just, my visual arts teacher, actually, of all people, I was doing my year 12 project, which was a massive piece of paper. It was all black pen, really detailed drawings. And she sort of just said to me, "Why don't you put architecture on your form?" I said, "Oh, okay, well, I put architecture number 1. I think I put radiography number 2. I to an extent, sort of fell into architecture, and went straight from high school into university. And I guess architecture just grew on me from almost sort of first year architecture. I really enjoyed what I was doing, and I'm openly sort of will say that I sort of fell into it and got lucky to an extent, and here I am today.
I think a lot of people relate architecture to or more or less it is one of those, it's an arts really, isn't it?
It is an art, and like art too, it's always quite subjective too, which is is the part I like about it too. I mean, I have a different taste to you. You have a different taste to the next person. It's all quite subjective what people do and don't like, and I guess to an extent that's how architecture's sort of measured, is what people think of it. But that itself is quite subjective and open to interpretation.
So what was uni life like then, studying architecture?
I'm going to say good and bad. I was always sort of grounded by the pragmatic aspects of architecture and making sure things could, to an extent, stand up. It's all well and good to design a skyscraper that sits on a toothpick, and that'll probably get you the best marks. But in the end, I still just kept coming back to making something that was semi-respectable, I guess, in terms of its buildability. You still sort of think about that. In hindsight, I probably would have and probably could have had a bit more fun with architecture in that uni. But I enjoyed my uni experience. Probably the hardest part, I guess, is architecture is a 5-year degree. It's probably one of the longest degrees.
It is. It's a long time, isn't it, really?
It's like, compared to other degrees, I mean, a double engineering degree is probably 5-6 years. There's not too many degrees at the University of Newcastle that's longer than an architecture degree.
Well, it's up there with medicine as well.
Yeah, and it's just a long period of time. And I think it's broken into 3 years at the start, 2 years as a master's at a later date. But I needed a little bit of time after my first 3 years because I'd gone straight from HSC schooling basically straight into first year. And as we all know, uni's a lot different to just doing the HSC. It's a lot of onus is put back on yourself. And I mean, almost the first couple of assignments are just like doing the HSC again, and you do that for 3 years and you sort of not burn out with education, but I'd sort of, by the end of those 3 years, when you take your year off, I ended up taking 3 years off, I think, just because I enjoyed working and probably not the study at that time. So, and
just by sitting here in this short space of time, I get the feeling you're not a mainstream kind of guy. Like, you like to challenge things a little bit differently and do things in a different way as well.
Yeah, I do, but I guess I'm grounded by the pragmatic side of architecture. There's so many components to being an architect, and I guess the diverse roles that we play that's part of the allure of the job, and it's quite interesting. So certainly like to think of it a bit more holistically than most, I guess.
So outside of university, once you had that break and completed your studies, what did you do from there?
So basically from university, I went straight into a sort of, I guess, a mid-tier local architecture firm. Ended up staying there. I guess ultimately it was about 7 or 8 years by the time I left there. First 3 years just worked exclusively full-time. A lot of different commercial, residential projects, and I guess it was small enough that you weren't pigeonholed into any one component of the job. So you did get quite a diverse experience in those early days.
Did you get to go on site often?
Not as much as what I did when I started to go out, I guess, on my own. You're probably a little bit more pigeonholed to the office, more, I guess, in a drafting sense more than anything. You'd occasionally meet clients in those initial couple of years, but it wasn't a great client interface, I guess. At that stage, you're sort of out the back drafting away, I guess. So.
I guess that's part of having an architectural practice as well, but a lot of architects that I know and work with, they say the same thing. In those medium-sized sort of practices, you do get stuck in the office, and as an architect, being an artistic person working within the arts realm, you crave that client interaction,
that creativity and that
creativity. Exactly right.
Which I guess you don't get in those first couple of years. Which is in hindsight why I wish I'd have completed more of it at uni, because you certainly don't see that sort of level of creativity in the real world that you could have got away with at uni. So, that's I guess all in hindsight now. But speaking with some of my other sort of graduates I went through university with, when you go into the bigger firms, I guess they almost got stuck 1, 2, 3 years exclusively doing details or exclusively doing dimensioning. Like, so I guess the mid-tier firm suited me in that you were sort of exposed to different, I guess, stages of the project. So you were doing the DA application, you were doing the CC application, you were looking at some of the on-site stuff. So that sort of was quite appealing about that.
To be a really great practical architect, you really do need that experience of, like, it's not just designing buildings, is it? There's so much more beyond that with actual zoning and planning and actually obtaining approval for the building. So you really need that practical application to be able to liaise with those relevant bodies as well.
That's 100% correct. And that's probably something that isn't taught at uni, I guess, to an extent. You find a lot of third year, even fifth years, if they continue to go straight from first year through to fifth year, you sort of come out and you don't have that practical experience of actually what is required to even lodge a simple DA for a small alts and ads. You can really only learn that sort of stuff on the job, I guess.
So what happened after that? You were working for that mid-tier architecture practice. What sort of transpired for the next step?
About 2013, I don't want to say I was disillusioned with what I was doing, but in that sort of firm, you were doing a lot of work that wasn't getting built. So you're just documenting these job after job after job, and none of them you're actually seeing getting built. Like, they were great documents, but they just weren't being built.
Why is that? Was it because they cost too much, or the client just didn't bother going through with it?
There's probably a couple of different factors. I guess there were a lot of moving goalposts. People just sort of said, okay, well, I can get X amount, but I can get a little bit more if I do this. I can get a little bit more if I can do this. And it was always just this little bit more that just kept pushing the projects. Plus, we'd only been a couple of years out of the GFC, so there was funding and those sorts of things were a little bit difficult.
So it was basically economically driven at that time.
Correct. Yeah, I'd say probably a lot more all economics. But I guess in 2013, I was through a friend of a friend. I'd met this guy who was a builder. I went out to my mate's house and he was sort of just tidying up his deck, and he was just out the back having a beer, just helping him build his deck. And we just sort of got talking because we had known each other through a few different golf days and different projects over the last sort of 5 to 10 years prior to that. And he just sort of said to me, he said, look, I know you're quite qualified in where you're at now. Would you be interested in coming and working for me? And at the time, it certainly was appealing. And I think we had probably 2 or 3 meetings and discussions together, went to his office, sat down with him, and probably one of the earliest things he said to me was that 50% of something is better than 100% of nothing. And he was doing these big jobs, and he just knew that they basically just had to get turned out. So the whole construction side of what architecture was became really appealing to me. And so I basically started down with him, just working in his office, and he just dropped a couple of projects on my table and said, look, we need a CC for this in 2 months. And it was sort of 20 apartments, and you sort of think, oh, shit, like, can I do that? So you knuckle down for a couple of weeks there, and then all of a sudden you get a CC, and it's like, okay, the piling rig's coming next week. You think, well, I don't know if these drawings are good enough to build off yet. Like, what? And then, so you sort of, I guess, designing on the run as they're getting built. You're still making modifications, but and then even in that early day, that project got a CC. It was under construction, and next thing I'm down there with him, marking out piles for this piling rig to come, and you're going off these grid irons, just marking it out with spray paint. Couple of days, then I'd go back to the office and do a bit of work, and then one of the blokes would call in sick, and the next day I'm down there sort of grinding away some like pile reel. I had no idea about any of this stuff, but it was like that construction side, I guess, of me watching things get built was, I guess, it's extremely rewarding, and that's what I guess as every architect wants to see is their project sort of come to fruition and be built. Because my whole sort of philosophy, I guess, with the business is that, I mean, I can draw anything as pretty as I want. I can draw it to 1 mil if you want. But seeing the things get built is probably the ultimate satisfaction. And I guess that's that first job then rolled into the next job and rolled into the next job. And sort of that's how I find myself where I am now doing what I'm doing.
You mentioned there about having that practical experience. I mean, that would have been like another dimension, really. I mean, if you're coming from that architectural background, from uni, working for these medium-sized architectural practices, and then going out the site and actually building what's on paper, like, it would have been really exciting.
Extremely exciting and extremely rewarding. And along the way too, I've built some great relationships with a lot of guys on site. I probably don't spend as much time on site as I do with what I did previously, but just being able to go down and see your work and probably more, I guess, see the bones of the actual, like, I love going up on the 9th floor deck over there and it's all steel. Like, just walking around that and seeing the bones of the buildings is probably like that's, I guess, the part I enjoy the most.
Yeah, I like what you just said. You know, it's more or less the skeleton of the build.
Yeah, I just love most people, whether it's an apartment or a house, a house, I guess people can see it a little bit more because they can go on daily, but on these big job sites, people just walk into a finished product. It's plasterboard, it's painted, it's all set. But you go down a hallway and there's the sort of gas, electricity, sewer, stormwater, like the amount of infrastructure that sort of just runs behind that piece of plasterboard is what really excites me. But most people just see a blank white ceiling. But I just love those little intricate parts about the build, and that's part of the challenge, but it's rewarding too to see it all happen.
That was 2013 when you started LJMA?
Yep. At first I started with the builder. But when I met him too, he almost had the discussion. He said, look, I don't want to own an architectural practice. That's not what I'm in it for, but let's just kind of see where this goes and how it grows and what comes out of it. So I guess LJMA was sort of established 2016. And it's just sort of, it's quite evolutionary, I guess, how it's come about.
So working for a builder as a practical in-house architect, going out on your own, what was that like?
It was certainly daunting, and obviously had a little bit of apprehension, but it was also extremely interesting getting to know that other side of architecture, the building side of architecture, and nutting through details and actually seeing, I guess, how people work on site. Like I said, we can draw to 0.1 of a millimetre. But you go out and you see a concrete lane, a formboard on Friday at 3 o'clock, and if it's within 50 millimetres, that's good enough for him.
He's stoked.
He's happy. So, where we can fret about these small little numbers, ultimately, and piling to an extent, you come out with a spray gun and just spray it and just it's thereabouts. But on my computer, it is 114.16 away from that grid line, but it's just not how it happens on site. So getting that just sort of helped, I guess, in and where I've ended up now, just having that practical knowledge with a builder, how things happen, sequencing the things. And obviously too, we do make plenty of mistakes along the way. But it's just having that, I guess, that creative problem solving, which is part of what you learn at uni, is having that ability to say, okay, we've made a mistake. What do we do to fix it? How do we rectify it? We always learn, probably doesn't happen on the job the next time. But it's just about making decisions on the run and being creative with your problem solving and coming up with an idea that's going to, I guess, suit everyone.
There'll be people listening to this who are an architect and they're working on their own, or they're already in an established practice and they're thinking about going out on their own. Did you have a network of clients, or did you just have that one job and then your name just got out there? I
really just had that one job with the builder. I had worked with plenty of other consultants prior to that. So when I came across with the builder, I brought across some of my consultants that I've been using or talking with, and I already had a relationship and sort of introduced the builder, much in the same way that he introduced me to a lot of consultants as well. So it worked both ways.
It's just that good old relationships working.
It's purely just relationships. And I think if you're, I guess, humble and grounded about what you're doing, I think those relationships can just grow.
Did you ever have any thoughts where you thought, I've got 4 weeks worth of work in front of me, or I've got 6 weeks or 2 months, or geez, we're getting a bit light, there's only a week's worth? Like, how do you look at it like that?
Yeah, I guess you do start looking at that. I do sort of do a lot of, I guess, forward planning too. But at the same time, a lot of this stuff is out of my control to an extent. It's no point worrying about working in 6 months because it may be tomorrow, it could be in 2 months, someone could come up with a job. It's sort of...
It just seems to happen, doesn't it?
It just sort of naturally evolves. I've found in what I do, and certainly through a lot of relationships with a lot of different consultants. It's just sort of people just seem to put your name forward. You do a good job for them, and then all of a sudden your name goes forward. I'd openly play in probably a few too many golf days than I should, but at the same time, they're genuinely sort of networking events for me. It probably helps that I'm semi-decent at golf, and you have a good game and people go, oh, hit it unreal today. And then all of a sudden that name gets passed on, and a couple of months later, such and such, she played golf with you. And it's like, I don't know who I sort of know who I play golf with, but that having that relationship at a golf day sort of just leads to work. And
I think the beauty about golf and networking, particularly in construction, is you go along to one of these golf days and you become paired up with another guy. So you're sharing a golf cart with a guy, and you're more or less stuck with that guy for the best part of 4 hours.
Yep.
If you're playing 18 holes and there's a bit of lunch in it as well. So it's kind of forced opportune time to actually get to know someone. Whereas if you go to, say, like an information night or some sort of seminar, you're there, but
it's more of a passing sort of,
isn't it?
Hello and a greeting. And that's, I mean, what I find about those sort of golf days, those 4 hours, is you actually build quite a relationship with your playing partners. I'm happy to play with people I haven't met before. It's easy just to play with the 3 or 4 guys you work with every day, but it's probably more enjoyable playing with the 3 or 4 you've never worked with before. And forming those relationships, because there's a lot of emotions, I guess, that goes on a golf course, and you can probably, after 4 hours with someone, you can really, I guess, tell who a person is, whether, I mean, good or bad, or whether I do or don't want to work with them, I guess, to an extent. You can sort of nut that out after 3 or 4 hours playing golf with them and having a few beers.
Yeah, it's a really good way to look at it. And it comes back to that, I mean, relationships, and that's a simple form of marketing that just is part fun, but motivated to get outdoors and just have a round of golf and get to know someone. Like, it's pretty simple, really.
Yeah, it's and that's probably the way I'd like to market. Not that I do much marketing myself, but that's the kind of way I like to market myself, because you get to know who I am and what I'm about. And probably not for everyone, but it's the same with most people. But that's the sort of part I like about it.
I mentioned earlier about, I see a lot of this in Melbourne, but we've actually got the scaled building models. So we've got a 1 to 500 and a 1 to 100.
Yeah, we've got a 1 to 100 of the individual buildings, and I guess a 1 to 500 of the entire precinct, which helps to no end, I guess, explaining some of the context that we're situated in.
So I think people who come in who are actively looking, they feel at home, but they're also able to see, by viewing these models, of their surroundings, and if they're going to buy an apartment in this complex or one of these towers, how does it all sit, particularly when this area is so reliant on good infrastructure and having good facilities around you. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I think the benefit, I guess, of this display suite too is that it's quite an informal setting. You're not walking into a sales office as such, so there's no pressure. You can sort of come in, you grab a coffee, have a chat with the guys here, but just have a look around. There's no, I guess, that typical arrangement where you go into a sales office and there's a guy there sort of jamming you, and you just want to kind of...
Yeah, it's not forced. There's no stigma.
It's a sort of a natural sort of experience where you can just take it or leave it, I guess. And it's just one component, I guess, of the entire development, which is all quite intrinsically held together. And it seems to work, and it's a great little precinct, and it activates this, I guess, corner of the block, and this area's undergone rapid transformation in the last couple of years.
I want to take it back a little bit. How do you go from being an architect who's building alterations and additions or single dwellings? How do you go from that to, what have we got here? We've got 14-story buildings. So how do you get involved in those?
I guess I always was quite competent. I mean, I had been designing and documenting some of these multi-res type apartments for a few years prior to coming across. So I was quite competent in what I was doing. I just never probably had the responsibility fall on my shoulders for doing it. And I guess through the early days working with the builder, and we were working with his project, but this is sort of around the time we were introduced to the guys at Third Eye. They had a project coming up, and we were sort of tendering on it and sort of just helped out with a lot of what they were doing there.
So had they heard of...
They'd never heard of me before. Like we obviously met through this tendering process for another apartment. And
so you saw this project come up and thought...
Yeah, they had a project that they'd brought up from Sydney. It was all CC. It was all ready to be built. So the builder was just looking at tendering, and ultimately he did end up building the project, but sort of worked quite closely with the builder, helping him through that build process of that apartment building. And so just sort of naturally got to know these guys. And it was 12, 18 months later, they picked up another site, which they wanted me to do a modification on, which did, and it was all sort of, I don't want to say it was hairy, but it sort of had to go through the Land Environment Court. And I sort of look at that as almost my sink or swim moment. Like I was given that job, sort of let's just see how he goes. And I've found myself here. But during part of that, the Land Environment Court process, I was asked to go along on, I don't know, Wednesday or something. And I just thought I was just going to have a look. And then all of a sudden it was a 2-minute introduction. And it was like, all right, we're going to pass you over to Luke now with the architect. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. And so you're talking with a commissioner, you're talking with 3 or 4 heads from Newcastle Council.
Yeah, you're dealing with the big boys.
Yeah, and I probably talked a bit of gibberish, but it went on for about 45, 50 minutes, and you got all these guys listening to you, and I'm sort of thinking, like, it was not pinch yourself sort of moment, but it was sort of like, what am I actually doing here? Like, I didn't even think I was capable of doing this sort of stuff, and it just sort of, I guess I had that confidence behind what I was actually delivering to be able to speak so highly of it. But yeah, I kind of look at that. Looking back at that, I look at that as my sink or swim moment. Ended up swimming, and then it just sort of rolled on to the next couple of jobs, and yeah, we find ourselves here. But probably the best part I've found about it the last sort of 6-7 years is that what you're actually designing now, you know it's going to get built. You know it's not a piece of paper that's just going to sit idly. And I think that's why council respect me too when you go into the urban design meetings, is that they want to get it right too, because they know what you're sitting there for ultimately is going to be built.
Well, they know it's legitimate. They know that when you're going in there, and that comes back to reputation and credibility, but they know when Luke goes in there with his project on behalf of, you know, the JV or whoever's behind you, that Luke means business. This is not a waste of time for us, and we're not arguing over nothing. Yeah,
yes, and quite open to the whole process of it. But I remember going into one of my first urban design meetings at Newcastle Council, and I don't know if you're familiar with the process, but they've sort of got 6 guys that sit on the panel there and basically critique your design. But I walked into the first one, and like you said, you expect a big firm, and then all of a sudden I walk in, and they sort of double take, and they're like who's this dickhead? Like how's he got this job? Like, and then so you present to them, and they're, oh man,
But I like that, because they're naturally expecting a team or someone else, and to go in there and be underestimated, I like that. That's that's a challenge too that I've really enjoyed, and it's quite satisfying, I guess, to sort of go in there and then they're knowing that they've got that mentality, to sort of be able to disprove them wrong and to I guess succeed in what you set out to do. And you need to have that credibility, and it's not just about credibility, but it's being able to walk the talk and stand behind what you're going to be challenged on in those situations.
Yeah, that's correct. And I touched a little bit on luck before, and for the first couple of years doing it, I sort of thought I was quite lucky. But I guess on the other side of luck is you've got to actually have the ability then to, I guess, make the most of those situations when you're thrown into them. It's a little bit lucky too, but you've got the competency to then back that up and make the most of those lucks and those breaks that you're given throughout projects, throughout life in general, I guess.
So you're basically known now for being able to work on these large 14-story apartment buildings.
Yep.
What's next on the cards for Luke and your practice, which is basically Luke?
It is. It's purely just Luke, but we like I said, I'm not taking all the credit for this, because we have a great team. I guess you got developers, you got builders, you got project managers, you got real estate agents, you got funders. So there's a big team behind it. So I'm not here to take all the credit for it. I really enjoy working with that team, and I've sort of diversified, I guess, in the past sort of couple of years. We're sort of doing, I do a little bit of government work and a few sort of commercial industrial projects. So I'm not just, I guess, pigeonholed into these, whilst yes, they do take up probably 80% of my business, but still I do have a lot of mates that are builders that I've naturally gone to school with or naturally just formed relationships with over the past 10 years or 12 years, however long I've been doing it, which I'm more than happy to help out on some of their projects. They'll come to me and say, we've got this small, we're just doing a kitchen up, or we're doing a deck. Do you mind just drawing that up for us? And And I don't mind that kind of work. I like the breakup of the big stuff.
I like how you're so diversified. Like, you're a relaxed kind of guy, but you like being diversified and doing a bit of everything.
It just helps from a business point of view. It just helps break up the days, the workload. It's new challenges. It's different challenges. No, I guess no 2 day is the same. You can sit there and sort of design or do concrete setup plans for a day, but then you can go back tomorrow and you can do like a nice render for a new home. So just having those swings is enjoyable, and I guess it's what's helped me stay so passionate about what I do.
What do you like to do outside of work when you're not sort of involved in these type of projects?
My number one hobby, I guess, at the moment is golf. I've always played golf. I love just getting out there, to be honest. On the weekend it was Saturday and it was just out in the yard, and just looked up and it was no wind and a perfect blue day, and I was around my brothers and said, look, let's go play golf. Teesside in half hour, let's go do that. So I obviously keep a handicap of what sort of fluctuates in between 0 and 2. But I like...
You're obviously talented then, because it's a very difficult game.
To be honest, I just enjoy it. And best part, I guess, about working for yourself too is that you can sit here now, and if I look outside the window and sort of think, I've got a bit on, but it's a sunny day, you'll go out and you'll play golf it doesn't have to necessarily be 18 holes, it can be 3 holes, it can be 2 holes, it can be 9 holes. But I have found over the past couple of years, it's really helped with my workload, if that I don't know how it doesn't, to my wife, it doesn't make sense that I've taken a couple of hours off to go and play golf.
Well, it's basically an outlet. So the way I look at it, and when you work for yourself, you have that luxury where if it's a nice afternoon like this, you can go out, you could play golf, but from doing that, you get back like a re-energized,
and that's why I almost force myself some days to go out and play it. It might be winter and it's cold and I don't really want to go out there, but you're sort of sitting there and you're sort of just getting bogged down in your work. All of a sudden you go to the golf course for half hour, 45 minutes. You don't just go, you still think about work, and you come back and you just, all these ideas that have just hit you on the golf course, you come back and then you can just sit there and just spit them out. And it's actually helped your productivity taking time off. And I know it doesn't make too much sense, but that's what I found.
It does to me.
It is working for me.
And sometimes you have to talk yourself into it, because you can easily talk yourself out of doing something.
Yeah, it's easy just to sit there and keep working, but I guess the path that you're heading down isn't necessarily the right one. And until you can step back and look at it a bit more objectively and say, well, it starts to sort of make sense when you can sort of step back, and then you can go back in with a refreshed, re-energized mindset, and all of a sudden it just happens in the next half hour. So it's quite beneficial.
Okay, so with the West End redevelopment, it's quite a significant project for Newcastle. So what's your favourite part of this project?
It's probably seeing the transformation of this area from what it was. It was a quite industrial, quite contaminated part of the city, and to actually see it develop is extremely satisfying. Again, I'm going to say it's probably not for everyone, this way of living, and that's fine. But I think there's just having this diversification it's what's needed, I guess, in today's sort of modern lifestyle.
And do you have input into the design or interiors, or is that now, do you just bring someone in for that?
It's always beneficial to any project to bring in as many consultants that are probably more specialised than me. I mean, sure, I can pick out a kitchen benchtop and colours and stuff, but it's not my passion, and I certainly think that other people do a much better job at me, so I don't see why you wouldn't sort of bring in a person like that to help. It only makes the project better. And that goes for apartments, but it also goes for the residential projects I'm working on too. It just, like I said, it's not my forte, and doesn't really get me going, that sort of stuff, but to other people it does, and that's great, and it's a massive help to the project.
Now, what about the actual project? So can you describe with this West End development, like what does it basically feature on this site?
There's the site we have out the front there has 149 apartments and 3 commercial tenancies. The development out the back here has 110 apartments or 2 commercial tenancies. I like the challenge of, when we're given these sites, when someone comes to me with a site and sort of says, look, here's this site, what can you get on it? You go, you can get 150 apartments. Okay, well, that's great. We can pay $10 million for that. Like this isn't a small amount of pocket change here. You got to back yourself that you can get that approved. And I've come to enjoy that challenge a lot more than most. And like I touched on before, these projects are going to be real projects too. So what you're giving numbers, it's probably going to be pretty close to that, or it's needed to enable the purchase price. So it's certainly interesting.
So what about, like, you're obviously in touch with the practicality of the business. So what are people talking about at the moment, or what's the market saying about an apartment? Like what does the buyer want at the end of the day with their apartment at the moment?
I think basically a lot of natural light. It's got to feel light. It's got to feel bright. It's got to feel spacious. It's just got to make sense too, from basically a purchase price too. What you can buy a unit for here in Wickham is completely different to what you can buy an apartment for over in Honeysuckle. So I don't want to say the build cost kind of reflects that to an extent, but
that's important, particularly in COVID times, natural light, people working from home now. So that's a really important part of living now.
You're starting to, all that sort of stuff is getting factored now into designs, and I can't help too, no matter what apartment I do or where it is on the floor plate or where it sits. I always probably inherently imagine myself living in that apartment too, how I would use it, how I would see myself moving around it, and then what I do and don't want out of an apartment. I still can't help but put myself in that apartment when I'm designing it. So it's always, I like to think that it kind of not just works for me, but it's sort of a bit more well thought out than just a.
You're in touch with how it's going to feel.
It's just not a box. Is I guess what I'm saying. It's more than that.
What about the common areas, like the spaces up on top of the building? What are they like?
Once you're up there, they're quite special up that high. People don't, as much as in the early days you take drones up and have a look, but until you're physically up there and you stand up there and you can see, you can go up on the 6th floor and you can see Merriweather Beach. People wouldn't even sort of factor into their thought process. But once you're up in on the top floors, it's quite impressive.
And the beauty of this development being at the West End, you pretty well have a west to east view straight down the harbour as well.
I was going to say most apartments can sort of see Nobby's down the end there. It's a great view over sort of a pretty impressive city now from the last couple of years. It's but even the view up to the north, up the Hunter River there is something that people can't understand. That, like, the view up to the north isn't even thought about, I guess.
Well, it's one of those views, like you just said, like everyone expects in this part of the city to be able to see the harbour and Honeysuckle and the development there. But being at this height, you're sort of past the headland, so you can actually see, like you mentioned, Merriweather Beach. And
Correct.
So it's a completely different view.
You can see Merriweather Beach. You see the hills rolling around. It basically goes down through Adamstown. The top of the building over there, you basically can see the finishing post on Broadmeadow Racetrack, and you can all but see the surface of Hunter Stadium. Although it's you sort of look at it as a western aspect, but it's the views out that way. Newcastle and its surrounds are quite pretty to the west and the north as well. So it's more than just the harbour, I guess. Quite nice views out over the parklands and those areas.
Well, Luke, it's been really nice to sit down and talk to you, and I can tell that you're a relationships guy. Like, you just like the good old fashioned relationship of talking to the client, the engineer, the consultants, even to the council.
I don't think anyone likes talking to the council.
They're our best friends.
Yeah.
By the way, it's an observation of mine, but from simple marketing to you're wearing a Lacoste shirt and you have your logo on the arm. So yeah, very well done.
It's all part of the branding.
It is, and just good old fashioned relationship. Nothing too out there, special or tacky or anything like that. Just good old formidable relationships, which I love, and that's the theme of this podcast, just having the good old fashioned relationship and the real stories. And to have an authentic person sit down and come on the show, it's been really fascinating. So I'm really thankful for your time.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Well, that was another Build Hatch episode with leading architect Luke Mahaffey from LJMA Architecture. As usual, please check out our Instagram where you'll be able to learn more about our guests and the features of the projects that we talk about. Have a great week and you'll hear me again on the airwaves next week. Thanks for listening to another episode of Build Hatch.
You have experienced a Build Hatch developed production.